side, whichever. In the event of an emergency, exit doors are at the back and here at this side. The toilets, the gents are out through the doors and the ladies are in through this door on the right. So this is the final part of our project that has been part funded by the National Lottery. The first part was a bus trip to Derry on the 16th of August. The group had a guided tour of the Guildhall, the Tower Museum and the Siege Museum. And following this they had a guided tour and running commentary on the city walls by our guest speaker tonight, Tony Moore. So, if anyone's interested in joining the Historical Society, please speak to James Monaghan or George Kerr or Phyllis or myself, and we'll get your names and get you an application form to join up. And all of our information sessions are usually no charge, but there is a donation box at the back of the hall if anybody wants to give a donation on the way out. It'd be much appreciated. So I'd like you to give a warm welcome to Tony Moore. Tony is a tour guide in Derry. He does tours. He told me there that he's done, I think, 3 today already. So he's been a busy man. So this is now, he's going to give us a talk on the Siege of Derry. So thank you.
Now then, you're very welcome. I'm usually walking backwards when I'm doing this, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can get used to it tonight, but please enjoy it. I'm Tony, and if you're ever up in the town there, the big city, come up and say hello anyway, even if you're not coming on a walking tour. And we do, it's very, very busy in the city today. But anyway, folks, great to have you. I'm going to take about maybe an hour and a quarter of your time, not too long, I hope. And I hope, can you all understand me okay? Use some kind of Anyway, so yeah, I'm going to talk about this little city behind us. You know it's not too far away, but I'm going to introduce you to basically what happened in the 17th century, and then I'm going to take you through the actual build-up to the siege and what happened, and then the siege. People argue was there actually a siege. Now, I went to a lecture with a guy, Brian Lacey, who I mentioned it. He's a great fan. I'm a great fan of his. Brian Lacey did a thing in the town, and he says he really got everybody's attention. He says there's 2 things, and it was a mixed crowd. There was about maybe 150 there. He says there was no siege of Derry. And then he says St. Clodagh never set foot here either. Oh, he says I've got you all awake now, haven't you? Oh, big God. So tonight, anyway, folks, let me just take this off here. I'm not very keen with that. Now tonight I'm going to chat to you about the importance of the city. As historians, the 17th century was of great interest. It should be of great interest to yourselves. The area of Inishowen, and particularly the River Foyle, had been much of a strategic importance to sort of the UK. And when you think of it now, when it came to the finding of America, the traders of London got very interested in this natural deep water port, which is just up there in the northwest of our city, and the River Foyle. And I always tell the Americans, you go out about 18 miles, turn left, your next stop's America, there's nothing in between. Now we know Amelia Earhart in 1932 got a lover, landed not far from the city, and she was speaking French to some farmer. He had a clue what you talking about there, love. No big God. But anyway, that was all going on. But by the 1600s, the hill and the island, which was then called Dara. Now that just means oak trees. If you haven't, and I usually have to explain this to people. The river Foyle used to go right around the hill. If you've all been to Derry, but there's no quiz at the end of this as far as I know. But the river used to go right around the hill, and it was covered. The hill was covered in oak trees, and that's where the Dara came from. Dara became Dora. Dora became Derry because it was one of the bishop's wives. She said, I believe I'm going to Derry, and I believe it makes you merry. There you go, that's what they said about that. But through the destructs and rebuilds over the years, and it's long before the siege, it had been blown up and burnt and reburnt and rebuilt and blown up again. But by the 1600s, the Celtic chieftain at the time, he sort of thought he was an owner of the place. Cahir O'Doherty, Sir Cahir O'Doherty, had worked there and had become accustomed to the use of the river by the actual English coming over. Now, the traders of London, there was a Henry Dockery. Him and Henry Dockery were good mates and they looked after each other. But Henry Dockery thought, this is a great place, you know. Although the Irish kings didn't think so. The O'Neills, the O'Cahans, the O'Donnells, they felt hard done by. Now, they ended up, your man brought them up, your man Dockery brought 3,000 troops. And they eventually, do you remember, have you ever seen Culmore Fort? Have you ever been to the north of the city? There's a tiny little fortress in the north there, Culmore. He was there, the city wasn't built at this stage as a fortress, but he chased those kings of Ireland. They left in 1607 from Rathmullen. You probably know this, the flight of the Earls. And they said, well, we're way off the Rome, we'll get the Pope to help us. Well, they never came back. But by this stage, the city had a lot of people coming from Scotland. They brought their faith with them. They brought their Presbyterianism. They also had a lot of people coming from England, and they brought their Anglican faith. Now, the guilds of London got really fed up with being attacked. Now, I'm doing this I'm trying to keep it as simple as I can, folks, but they kept being attacked by they were going back and forward to America. They were using it as great trees, nice rivers. Keep getting attacked. So they asked James I of England, is there any chance we can build a walled city here? Can we go about that? And he said, by royal order, what I'm going to do. Now, I have to say the people of Coleraine were really put out by this, because they thought, it's going to be, do it here. Because Coleraine had a partial wall as well. Oh, big God, your man, Henry Dockery. Henry Dockery says, no, we'll build it here. Now, would you believe there's a bit of an effort going on at the moment. Somebody said they built the walls of Derry on the wrong side of the river. Now, if you go out towards Brady, Dunalong, at the same time they were building the walls, they were actually building sort of foundations there for the city walls to go to. But it never really got too much, and they carried on building than what we have today. So, anyway, the English traders, they brought their own workers, the land was promised them as payment, spreading through them, and the Earls had gone and left the city to its own regards. Now, the city then, they asked, it was a royal charter, James I, James Stuart. Now, if you look at the whole 17th century, it was all Stuarts. But previous to that, it was Tudor. Then after that, it was Habsburg. So the 17th century historians, you should know this, it was all Stuarts. But James I, James Stewart, not Jimmy Stewart from It's a Wonderful Life, not that Jimmy Stewart, but anyway, he says, I'll make a royal charter and we'll change the name to London Derry. Oh, big God, that's where the fighting starts today, folks, you know that yourselves. But that's right. So they built the walls of Derry. Now, this is what it looked like in 1680 when the siege was taking place. I don't know if you can see there. Let's just see if I can point out something. It's a handy wee yoke here. But the river used to go along around here, this area here, and that is where the bogside is today. So the river drained off slightly, but when they went to build the walls, this is where the Guildhall is today, just here. That's called Fanny's Wharf, and that was Shipquay Gate. If you've ever been to the walled city, you would see that. I'm going to move this on to just give you an idea what it actually looked like. Oops, I may have gone too far there. Just take it back one. Yeah. Now, if you look at that was a pressure. I'm part of a group known as the Friends of the Walls. And they commissioned this for the 400th anniversary of the walls being built. Now, you'll notice there's no St. Columb's Cathedral there. It's not there. And you'll also notice if you take a look, and maybe it's hard to see there, there's only the outside of the walls. There's no that in, well, there's a bit there near the Royal Bastion, but here it's basically a banking. So when they finished the walls in 1618, Richard Doddington came along. Now Richard Doddington, the builder was a guy called Peter Benson. Now people said to me the other day, was it slaves that built? Well, no. It was Scottish and English men, they were paid for them, they were carpenters and stuff. A lot of them died when they started building the walls. And the outside of the walls here became like a dry moat. So this is your Shipquay place. This was called Fanny's Wharf, would you believe? Fanny's Wharf. Now there were only 4 main gates originally. Now the 2 gates at the top, Bishopgate And Ferry Gate had a drawbridge, went up and down. The other two, this one here and the one here, Butcher Gate, would have had a portcullis come down. So the dry moat going right round. The dry moat, I'm told now by the books and the references, and I've got people coming down the reference books. They went down about 20 feet and about 32 feet wide. Now, they flew everything you can imagine what they flew in there. But if you did not want to go in there on a horse, and you certainly didn't want to climb through it. So that would have been a dry moat going. This would be Orchard Street here today. That's called the Water Bastion. Now, here, this is where, if you're into that Derry Girls thing, ladies and gentlemen, that's where the Derry Girls Memorial is, and you've got your Fordside Shopping Centre here today. Do you get that in your head? That's what was going on. Now, what happened then? Ladies and gentlemen, as you go through that, oh, what I'd say, I need to put my glasses on for this. As you go through the 17th century, 1605, the Gunpowder Plot, a plot against the James I. This was Catholics going to blow up the Houses of Parliament. James I died in 1625. I'm going to go right up to the siege now shortly, folks. Charles II got on the throne in 1625. He was executed in 1649. Now, we had two sieges up this very wall at that stage. Now, by that stage, let's see if we can move it on a bit here. We'd actually, at that stage, built St. Colin's Cathedral. So there's the cathedral now. We're now looking at the other end. This part here is Bishop Gate. We've got a Reveline here. This Reveline, they built those out, usually made of a lot of what do you call them? For holding wine in casks, the big casks, beer casks and wine casks. They filled them full of sand and rubble, and they built them out here as a sort of second defence or first defence before. There's the portcullis. Look at the drawbridge there. That's at Bishop Gate. This is Ferry Gate. Look, there's another, and there's the dry moat appearing. And look, this is now gone 1633 because they built here St. Colin's Cathedral. Now, in St. Colin's Cathedral, there's also something interesting there, folks. If you've been on the walls, you might have seen these little, what they call sentinel posts. Do you see them? Anybody been on the walls? You've seen the sentinel posts on the walls. Inside there, and we've discovered there was an inner citadel that went round there. Now, when Charles II got on the throne, he did not like that citadel. It was where all the bishops and the lords and the ladies would have been in there. All the ruffians, all the workers would have been around here. The place was built to hold originally 6,000 people. Time of the siege, there was a lot more than that. We'll come back to that. But let's go on then. Now, in 1641, the first siege, there were three sieges. The first one was by the Catholic lords of Ireland attacked the place. They weren't happy. They didn't get in, it didn't happen, they were routed. Charles I made sure that kept happening. Now, the next siege was 1649. Now, 1649, I have to tell you folks, for about 11 years, it was called the 11 Years' War. In Ireland, there were over 600,000 people died. It was one of the biggest atrocities that went on. But in 1649, what happened here, it all changed round. Inside the walls were the Protestant people. It was built as a Protestant town for Protestant people. Inside the walls were the Protestants who were backing Oliver Cromwell. Outside the walls were the Catholics. Who were they backing? You never guess. Charles I. And there was like the war going on, but they never got in either. So there's your second. Now, they call them the Maiden City. I use a little joke when I take the Americans around the walls. I say they call it the Maiden City because there's so many women here, but that's not true. I mean, look at the state, I'm only 35, but anyway, you know the kind. Anyway, along come that Jane. Now, what happened next? Charles got his head cut off. The Commonwealth Republic, Oliver Cromwell, and that's what I'm talking about, that 11 Years' War. But Oliver Cromwell died in 1660. Charles II came back on he was the restitution of the monarchy. The Black Death in London, 1665. The Great Fire of London, 1666. Charles died, Charles II. And in came James II, crowned in 1685. James the Seventh of Scotland. Now, there's still the Stuart dynasty, ladies and gentlemen. 1687 came along. Now, there was a problem. A problem happened. They discovered that James was very familiar and very handy with the Roman Catholics. Ooh. He set Richard Talbot. If you go down to Dublin, Malahide Castle in Dublin, Richard Talbot was there, and he was made the Earl of Ireland. The Earl of Tyrone. He was at now. So Richard Talbot was a good friend of James. Now that's very important for our stories. We'll see them shortly. James was banished from England. Now we know ourselves. The English Parliament asked Mary, who was his daughter, would you come across and be our queen? And she says, only if he comes along with me. And she was married to William of Ultric, William of Netherlands, William of Orange. They came across, certainly. And the first duel, now we've had one recently, but the first queen and king duel together was them two, Mary II and William III. King Billy had now been crowned. James was going, hang on a minute. Now he'd gone to France and was exiled in France. Would you believe his cousin in France was Louis XIV? Now Louis XIV was fighting everybody. He thought this would be a good distraction. I'm going to get you now back to Ireland, James. And he sent James back to Ireland with an army, and they arrived at Kinsale in Cork. Now when he arrived at Kinsale in Cork, we're moving up now. He arrived in March, but I'm way ahead of myself, because let's get back to what happened in Derry. Let's have a look at some of these characters here, if I can get them going on here. Let's get familiar with them. There is... Get it up. Get this moving. Excuse me. Not great with technology. Whoops, back a ways. That was good, wasn't it? Right. King James II. Don't look at these characters now. King William III. They were fighting over the English crown. And who's in the middle of them? Louis XIV. Now, Louis XIV had plenty of money. He was fighting with everybody, and it was him that sent James back. But, ladies and gentlemen, there was another character came onto the scene then. He actually was a captain. James, maybe you know before I even say, he was stationed in Donegal. And his name was... Whoops, we keep doing the wrong one here, folks, sorry. His name was Lieutenant Colonel Robert Lundy. Now this boy here, my notion, and reading through all the documents I've ever read through, if he hadn't been made governor of the city, there would have never been a siege. This man here got his commission from James II, the Catholic king. He was stationed in Donegal. Now, when this whole eruption started, they actually sent for troops from Scotland. Now, these big hairy boys came across. They got the name of the Earl of Antrim, who was Jacobite as well. He was the follower of James. The Earl of Antrim led these Redshanks from Ayrshire. These were big hairy boys, ladies and gentlemen. The ginger hair was coming out everywhere. They were actually, in the books it tells you, they were measured by the Earl of Antrim to make sure they were over 6 foot tall. Now they arrived at the city along with Lundy. He arrived as well. He came one way. He came from Donegal. The Earl of Antrim came from the northeast of Ireland. And as they met, at the gates of Derry, and we know the story of this one, they wouldn't let him in. Now, there were 13 young boys. Inside the city walls, there was an argument going on. Do we let these in? Do we not let them in? Which king are they for? It was decided we'll only let the Protestants in. Robert Lundy was from the Church of Scotland, and they let him come in. And they gave him a commission when he came in. Because everybody, all the officers that were there, started to leave. And inside the walls there was a bit of a panic on, because they'd heard what was going on in the south of Ireland. The Jacobites had made their way across Ireland and got to Dublin with not a problem. What's going on? And then a letter appeared in Cumber. And it said there's going to be a big massacre. Now this is only like 40 years after what had happened in Ireland. There had been a big massacre. So the Irish coming up and fighting, they'd killed a lot of people. A lot of Protestant people were burnt and massacred. But inside the walls, they didn't know what was going to happen. And the guilds of London said, this is a better idea. Just let the Protestants in. And in came Lundy with what troops he had left. Now, Lundy was then, because the other officers had all left, was asked, would he like to be the governor of the city? Governor Lundy. Governor was in charge of the army that was a garrison there. There was quite a bit of an army there. Quite a bit of an army. But ladies and gentlemen, down in Dublin, there's a bit of a worry going on. What's going on up there? Because James appeared to be getting ready to surrender the city. Now what happened next? Now we're coming up to about March. By February 1689, they proclaimed William the King of England. He didn't get made king until about April, but they said, right, we're proclaiming him, and Mary quit. We usurped your man, James. Right, says he, we'll sort this out. Now, inside the walls, this man here, Colonel Lundy, in March 1689, a month before the actual siege correctly started, 2 warships come up the river. Cunningham and a guy called Riversdale came up the river, and they were on these big warships, and they had I think it's a battalion. I'm not sure of the numbers, maybe 400 in a battalion. And he says, we've been sent by William to back up the city of Derry, or city of Londonderry, that's one. Your man here. We don't need them. No, we don't need them. No, we don't need them. And he told them to go away. Now, look, we'll give you something to give them ammunition. They said, we can leave the troops here. No, we don't need them. In fact, he says, any officers who are still here from the original garrison, if they want to get on the boat and go back, away you go. People were going, hang on a minute here. Hang on. There are a lot of people that came from the likes of the little towns, Raphoe and Newton, Limavady, and even Coleraine had come into the city. By the time this was going on, there should have been only 8,000 people inside the city. There were nearly 28,000. And they were panicking. Now they said, we need to get out of here. We need to get out. Ladies and gentlemen, coming up the west coast of Ireland, up towards Omagh, up came the Jacobites, and they were a big army. The Jacobites had the French troops, cavalry, and they were making their way up. But they were badly prepared. They were badly managed, instructed. Now, the French army was being looked after by a guy called Auxe, I can't get my tongue around his name, A-U-X-E or something like that. He was keeping an eye for King Louis in France, and he told King Louis in a letter, if you give these guys, these Irish troops, these Jacobites, you give them 4,000 weapons, I can guarantee you within a month to be less than 1,000 of them working. They don't know how to use them, they're breaking them, and they're not being very useful. They were speaking French to an Irish army. That was difficult. Now, Lundy had got word that they were approaching Omagh, and troops were sent out to stop them at Lifford. Now, you know Lifford, Clady, there's 3 rivers there, the Finn, the Mourne. Now, Clady Bridge was very important to them. Now, Lundy sent them out, but didn't supply them with any ammunition. So when this army appeared, the army says, we need ammunition. Where's the ammunition? Colonel Murray, Adam Murray, who was in charge inside Derry at the time, he said, we need ammunition. Ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you, Lundy moved out with a cavalry. 400 horses, cavalry. And he went as far as Lifford Bridge. And all of a sudden, he seen Rosen. Rosen was the leader of the Jacobite army coming up, a French general, and he seen them. And he, instead of attacking the army, which really were going from their side, they said, look, it's coming, they can see the cavalry. Lundy turned and went back to Derry. People said, why did you not stop them there? He was getting prepared to surrender. Now, there was different conferences of war going on inside, and every one of them, every minute, Lundy saying, now, where did Lundy come from? Where did he, now, are we going to be friendly to Lundy? Before the siege in 1870, he was in Tangiers. Now, Tangiers had been given to Charles II because he was married to a Portuguese wife, and the land of Tangiers was given to them. Tangiers was surrounded by the Moroccans, and there was another siege there. He seen what happened in Tangiers, and it was a route to the little town. Now he had this notion, and they think he had a notion, the same thing was going to happen in Londonderry. Now, back in Derry, they were going, why did you not attack them? Why did you not attack them troops coming up there? Back inside the walls, ladies and gentlemen, see where we are here. They eventually arrived, and they started to use these big mortar shells. Now, they were ill-equipped. Rosen, who was in charge, and there was a guy called Hamilton in charge of coming up from, they came up to attack the city. They surrounded the city, and the gates were truly closed. Now, this was now April 18th, 1689. The gates were closed. And the next thing, James, who'd gone nearly back to France, was told to get back. James himself, get up to that city. They'll surrender to you. Now, he was given impressions that the city would have surrendered to him. When they arrived at the city, they'd already started to use mortar shells on the city. He arrived at Bishopgate. Let me in. I'm your king. Now, as he approached the gate, they started shouting, no surrender, no surrender. We'll never surrender this Protestant town to a Catholic king and his army. Right, so you look round, the men beside him were getting shot. And that's the way that he says. And he wasn't a very good military tactician. He said, what we're going to do is have a siege. The Siege of Derry started, ladies and gentlemen. Now, it went on for 105 days. I can show you here where I'm showing you, I've got maps. This is a guy called Lyndon actually did this map here. Now here, ladies and gentlemen, the problem was, don't want to get your eyes on that thing. Rosen said, there's special tactics when you attack a walled city. You need 6 cannons pointing at the one point, and then you hit it together. Boom, and that wall will go down. Doesn't matter how wide it is, you hit it. They didn't have those cannons. All they had was those mortar shells. And the mortar shells, as you can see from here, now this is the waterside today. This is where Everington Hotel is. It's called Strong's Orchard. Now you can see the projectiles. This is they actually drew it on the map. So here you've got, this is where the Guildhall is. That is Bishopgate there. And you can see, even from this, that's up where the cemetery is, up beside that Craigan estate. And they were firing the mortar shells in, and the mortar shells were doing horrific damage to the houses and the people inside the houses. People were going to the walls to get shelter. 7,000 died inside the city. 7,000, ladies and gentlemen. And it went on for 105 days. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, where are we going next? They were reduced to eating, and I wrote this down earlier on. You'll see this if you go to Derry. It's certainly in the Apprentice Boy as well. And it tells you what, and they weren't messing about. Mice, rats, cats, fattened dogs they actually talk about. There's a list, I have another list here. Fattened dogs. What was a fattened dog? If they killed a French or an Irish soldier, they brought him in. Got their dogs to eat it. Oh, that dog looks nice and fat now. And they ate, oh, you can't see. You won't see too many dogs around Derry today, ladies and gentlemen. And if you're in Derry, stay away from a Derry stew. anyway, leave it at that. But anyway, you can see, now this is actually, I don't know how accurate it is, but if you go into the Guildhall in Derry, they actually have a menu, and it goes down a bit, said, fluke, you know those flat fish? They were on the menu as well. Anyway, that's that. But anyway, let's get back to what happened. Now, the siege had started. Lundy was inside for a while, and they didn't trust him. A guy called James Hamilton arrived from England. Now the king, he says that William's going, you need to sign this. There's an oath here of allegiance. This is a Protestant city. It belongs to William. Sign that. Sign it. And the people in the town knew there was something going on. It wasn't. He never did sign this lease. He never did. We don't know if he did or not, but they said he did. Didn't. They arranged Colonel Murray and George Walker. Walker ended up as the governor. Do you know Governor Walker's statue? He says, right, we'll let you go. There's boats sitting. Get out. Now, people tell you he climbed over the wall at Orchard Street, got into a pear tree and all that kind of stuff. In the writings of the historians, they tell us that he dressed up as a match lady. And we're not talking big sticks, we're talking match lady. And he carried them on his back, and he managed to get through at the water gate, which was down here, ladies and gentlemen. Now, this is another map of the city. He got out. Would you believe Lundy then went to Scotland? He got arrested. He was taken down to England, and he was questioned for his behaviour in Londonderry. The two boats, they were questioned. There was a tribunal. What did you do? He did go on to live a longer life. He lived to 1717. He went back and fought in the British Army in Spain. But he didn't. Now, every year you see him hanging from a thing in Derry, a gallows, and the burn of a Jesus in them. But he didn't die in Derry. But they were going to have they asked him to go back to Londonderry and have the trial. He says, I can't go back there. And he didn't. And he had enough friends to keep him going. But we reckon if he had have attacked and allowed and stopped sending troops away, he was about to surrender. And folks, just to finish with Lundy, there's a note, and certainly in the book that I have here, and there's a couple of books. There's a book by Milling, and I'll show you the books later on. He wrote a letter of apology to James II when he was in Scotland, and he was after that he didn't end up giving him the city of Derry. Oh, there's no question about it. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, he left the city in Colonel Murray and George Walker's hands. Now here we have there was a couple of, I'd say 5 skirmishes. Now the first one was well handled by Colonel Murray. What happened in a place called Pennyburn? Do you know Pennyburn in Derry? Anybody know Pennyburn? It's down where Desmond's Ford garage is, Sainsbury's, down that way. Actually, where I live. Anyway, down there, the Williamite army were now captured Culmore Fort. Murray now what he did was quite crafty. He sent these gunners, musketers, on either side of a hill. Now that's, in our words today, you know, this Duncragan Hill or whatever it is. But on that hill on the way down, and they hid in the trees. He ran out with a load of cavalry to take on the Williamite army. The Williamite army came to get them. They chased after them. He did a trick. He turned and went back towards the city. It's only a mile away from the city gates. But as they turned, a guy called Beaumont, he was like the Brigadier General. He was in charge. Came charging after them. Here, we've got them, boys. Let's go. Frenchman. Chased after them. The next thing, the musketeers were hiding, opened up. They got massacred. And Beaumont, the head of the French army, died. Boom, he fell off his horse dead. What were they going to do now? He let your man Roseanne in charge. But as they turned and went back again, they got another volley of cheers. And then down came Colonel Murray and had to go with the rest of them, charging with dragoons, as they call them. That was the first battle of Pennyburn Mill, and they killed the French general. There was another battle about 2 days later, and it didn't go so well either for the Williamite army. But they held Pennyburn, they held Comorford. They also then put a boom across the river. You might have heard of the boom going across the river. The boom was put up, they said, right. And the Jacobite army went on this side of the river, and they got some of the big oak trees. Now, this boom, when I say boom, it wasn't like a beaver dam, it was floating. Because they had to let some ships in. But they were very careful who they did. But they chained it off and they mined it. All this while, ladies and gentlemen, and I haven't mentioned them, supply ships were now lying off the coast of Lough Swilly. They'd been seen by the people of Derry when they originally came into Lough Foyle, but then turned and moved out again. Who was in charge of them? You'd have a guess. His name was Captain Kirk. It was like the Starship Enterprise coming around the corner, ladies and gentlemen. But it wasn't William Shatner, no. It was Percival Kirk. He was waiting with about 30 ships near Inch Island and refused to move or refused to take the boats up the Foyle. Are we like for time here, folks? Checking the time. He refused to take these ships up the Foyle because now the Foyle, even though it's a natural deep water port, on each side of it there's a lot of sandbanks. A lot of sandbanks on either side. And there's a narrow ridge comes up the middle of the Foyle, and then you reach the 7-metre drop at the Foyle itself, 28 feet along there. Now, he wasn't coming up. A boom across the Foyle, that was sorted out. The next thing happened, ladies and gentlemen, they discovered, now we're looking here, this is where St. Colum's College, it's called Lumina Christi today, but there's a windmill there, and the windmill exists inside the college grounds. That's where your man John Hume and Seamus Heaney, Brian Friel, they all went to school there, St. Colum's College. The windmill. That was years later, obviously, ladies and gentlemen. But this was being held by the Jacobites. Now, they'd actually started building like a trench. Now it's going down to the River Foyle there. So that's quite a steep bit of hill. If you know Derry at all, it's quite steep there, this bit. They made a trench all along there, and they thought, right, okay. Now, this is the first battle of Windmill Hill. So we've had 2 battles so far, and they went on Pennyburn, which is up here. They attacked from here. They tried to get up towards the Raveline. Out came Murray, and they, to be honest, they had, from the 13 apprentice boys, they'd actually ended up with something like 12 battalions or something. There was like 7,000 troops inside the wall, so they were well armed. The Jacobites weren't well armed. Not at all. But when they came here, they took Windmill. There was a lot of people killed. They reckon there was nearly 1,000 between the 2 armies were killed there, ladies and gentlemen, at the Windmill. And the Jacobite army made its way up here. Now the River Foyle, as I say, used to flow along there. Up there is where the cemetery is today, the city cemetery. It was the second battle. But this time, the Jacobites won the battle and managed to get in. But on the way, when they got back in again, they discovered that the Williamites, the people inside the city, had managed to take all the tools and all the shovels and things that they'd be using. And that was very useful. Now, one of the problems they had was that they call it foraging. Foraging, you had to forage for the horses. They feed the horses. We're doing that. And what they started doing was burning the land out here. Now, Roseanne, he was now in charge. Now, from specific instructions he got from James not to do it, what did he do? Now, we're into now June of 1689. The people inside the walls were really struggling. The buildings in here. Now, what they called the town house, that was the corporation hall, became the corporation hall. That had been completely shattered. They'd moved the command centre inside St. Colum's Cathedral. They'd even let, now this is quite unusual, at the time they let the Presbyterians even have their services inside St. Colum's Cathedral. They weren't too sure of the Presbyterians, but a lot of Presbyterians had helped in defending the walls. So that was going on in St. Colum's Cathedral. This here was all shattered. They rebuilt it later on as a corporation hall. Corporation hall would be very like the hall you see today in Coleraine. Very similar, if you've seen pictures of it. They're actually, I'm way ahead of myself here, but there was tunnels that go right up Bishop Street. It used to be called Gold Street up there. All right. Second battle, now Roseanne, what did he say? He said, what I'm going to do, I'm going to capture all of the local farmers, all the Protestant farmers, and I'm going to bring them up to the walls, and I'm going to say, we're going to kill them if you don't let out or you don't surrender. He wanted all, now a lot of troops have been captured from the Jacobite army. If you don't release those troops, I'm going to hang these people in front of you. Now on the walls, on this side of the walls here, now you go down there, that is where the, today, this is known as Coward's Bastion, and the one above it, this one here, it's got the name Hangman's Bastion. Hangman's Bastion. So the people inside the walls and Governor Walker said, if you do that, what we're going to do, you see the officers that we've got, the Jacobite officers, we're going to hang them over that wall. Now when James heard about what was going on, he told Roseanne, the French guy, let them go back. Now these people were living peacefully in Donegal or Omagh, they went back and they didn't do it. The next big, now this is the fifth big challenge to take the city. This is why I'm saying, was there really a siege? Butchergate. Now if you go up to Butchergate today, they'll tell you, Butchergate used to be called the Shambles. The road's a slight tilt down to the gate. The other side of the gate, you're going into the bog side, that used to be called the Cow Bog. Butchergate, the Butcher Street, used to have lots of butcher shops in it. And they hung their meat and the blood run down the gate into the Cow Bog. That's why it was called Butcher Street and Butchergate. Today, somebody will tell you, and I've heard people saying that, and I think it's true. Middle of June, like the 26th of June, something like that, 1689, Roseanne says, I know what we'll do. And he took about 700 Jacobite troops from up on Creggan Hill there. And they came up what is now known as Fawn Street. In the middle of the night, it was a very quiet night. To be honest, the skirmishes were well in between each other. This particular night, up went the gunpowder, explosives. They're all asleep. So they're all ready. Now, they didn't have many guns about them, but they had, right, there you go. They stood back, ladies and gentlemen, it was about 2:30, 3 in the morning. They lit the fire. Boom! They blew up Butchergate. Unfortunately, the gate came out on top of them, killed about 160 of them. They woke up the people who were guarding, or should have been guarding, and immediately they defended Butcher Street and the walls around here. You've got the Royal Bastion, and they started firing back. And they were like, oh! They made a complete mess of things, ladies and gentlemen. So you need to understand, what seemed like, and we were saying, was this a proper big siege going on? Most people would say it wasn't really a siege, but I think it was, because the people in here were saying, we can't get out. But ladies and gentlemen, it wasn't long then before King Billy, and he was sitting in Hampton Court Palace. You ever been to Hampton Court Palace? Beautiful Hampton Court. There's a place for historians to go, oh, it's magnificent. Anyway, he says, what's going on up there? I'm going to sort this out. Because now the news was that the whole European conflict had moved to the northwest of Ireland. He says, I'm sorting this out. He sent 3 warships up the river. Now, I've got a photograph of you. Have a laugh. I hope you have a laugh at this. I'm going to light it up a bit. These boys were hairy looking boys. When you see the state of these boys, there's one of them there. Look at that there. That's a good scary looking boy there. But they were coming out. That's the Williamite army. Now, he sent 3 warships up the river. The Mountjoy, the Phoenix, the Dartmouth. Now these were battleships. Came up the river. Meanwhile, Captain Kirk was still sitting there Michael Browning from the city, Captain Browning, was in charge of the Mountjoy. And they made their way up the river. It was approaching now the last week of July. Now, they say if you take 105 days from the 18th of April, the Julian calendar in the 18th century changed from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar. I forget the name of it now. You know what I mean? There was 11 days lost in the calendar. But up came, 105 days later, up came those 3 ships. They made their way along the channel. Michael Browning knew the way. They got. Now, they had to take a full tide, but as they got to the boom now, ladies and gentlemen, if you go down where the Foyle Bridge is, they're still finding stuff down there, around where the Foyle, there's Boom Hall down there. They managed to get at the boom, but the boom was mined. Colonel Browning jumped off, he died, he blew himself up, because. But the Mountjoy got stuck. And the other ships now, from the shore, there wasn't many guns, but they were trying to hit it with mortar shells, which was crazy. You should be firing directly at this thing. But the ship was stuck, the Mountjoy was stuck. And only at the low tide, the ship started to go like that. Somebody on board the ship said, point the guns into the river. On the side it was tilting. And they fired about 30 guns off, and the ship righted itself and got into the river again, and then all the other ships could come in. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in came the supply ships, and from the walls, now, they could see the ships coming in. Euphoria. The siege is over. Here they come. In came the 20 or so supply ships. Now, there's a lot goes on between all this, ladies and gentlemen. I've jumped quite a bit to get you in tonight, but a lot went on between these ships, and in came all the 20 ships, and the siege was failing. Now, the Irish army hung about for about another week or two, but it was too late. In was coming gunpowder, in was coming food, in come another regiment. And the cheer went up. Ladies and gentlemen, you know, today, you've probably seen this at some time or other. The governor, George Walker. You've probably seen that picture before. There's the governor, George Walker, there. Now, from the Royal Bastion, which was where they had a big pillar, and up on top of the column was George Walker. Unfortunately, it was blown up in 1973 in our current troubles. But his statue still exists today in the Apprentice Boys Memorial Hall. Have you seen it? On the third, you've seen it in the hall. Now, strangely enough, I'll come back to him being blown up, but he's pointing down to the river. And there's all the people around him. Now he's got a Bible in the hand there, and he's pointing out, and he's saying, look, the siege is over. The Jacobites are beaten. We've won. We've won. And folks, in came them ships. And it settled down a bit. The Irish army, the Catholic army, were now very much, never got paid. That was the other thing they were cracking up about. They're heading back down to Dublin. Now, you know, every year in our city we have a huge parade, and the apprentice boys at Derry march around the walls, parading and celebrating that. And rightly they should. They held out against an army when even their own generals and Lundy had given up on them. But the people's mindset, we are not giving up this city, never. Now, if you go into the Apprentice Boys today, there's a funny story about that. When the IRA blew up, that was 1973, they blew up the pillar with George Walker on it. Now, apparently, this is an urban legend, don't quote me on this, ladies and gentlemen, but anyway, 2 lads in the Bogside lifted up his head. One of them, about 18, 20 years later, one became a lawyer and the other became an accountant. They were living in Dublin. And one of them had Governor Walker's head in his garage. In the meantime, they had fixed Governor Walker up, and in Society Street, where the actual museum is today, for a number of years, he sat with his new head on, still pointing down over the river. Now, Billy Moore, who's no relation of mine, but he's the head of the apprentice boys. Billy says, "Oh, Tony, oh." I said, "What? Did you pay for that? Did you?" The two lads appeared about 20 years after the head disappeared off the head of the man. "Would you like to buy the head back?" Oh, lawyers, don't you know? Now, apparently a lot of money changed hands. Nobody's saying what. It was a silent little brown envelope. But today, ladies and gentlemen, if you go up into the Apprentice Boys Memorial Hall, and some people have been there, the proud George is standing with his new head on, and he's looking out to the foil, and he's telling you, in the cupboard beside him, is his original head, still sitting there. You make your own mind up on what they paid for that. But there it is. The two lads did well, that's all I'll say. Now, the city itself now today has moved on, ladies and gentlemen. Has moved on. Whoops, a wee bit too far. I'm going to show you where I got my bits and bobs from. Now, the city today, that's what it looks like today. You might have seen these pictures before. But along here, we have all the residents who wanted to take part. There's a thin red line there. Can you see that? I don't know if you can see that. So there is... that's the double bastion. That's Roaring Meg sitting there. That's where the pillar used to be there. That's the Apprentice Boys Memorial Hall. There's the Guildhall. This is now Bishopgate. Bishopgate, by the way, if you didn't know, is now called our Arc de Triomphe. Did you know that? If you have a good look at Bishopgate, on the inside you'll see the River Boyne god. Now, most of the rivers in Ireland will have a god or a deity, and above the cornerstone or the keystone is the Boyne River god was 1690 rode across it. Have a look the next time you're going through Bishopgate, and above it is a big stone. Now, on the other side of the gate is the Foyle River god. Now, in 1790, exactly 100 years after the Battle of Boyne, they put it up to commemorate that. Now, this is the important part, ladies and gentlemen. King Billy arrived in Ireland, as you know. He arrived in Carrickfergus. He made his way to Hillsborough. He sat in Hillsborough for a while, and then he gave out, "I'm not letting the grass grow under my feet." That's what he said. And when he had enough of an army ready, now he had German generals, Dutch engineers, Welsh and English troops, and they made their way down towards Navan. And coming up, the Irish army was smarting. Their very first battle had failed, and they made their way up. We'll sort this lot out. James, up they came. Go and visit the Boyne site. Unbelievable, great. As they came up, they met at the River Boyne. The two kings could see each other on the battlefield. The night before the battle, the 12th of July, the 11th night, King Billy got hit with a what they reckon it wasn't a 6-pound shot came out of a cannon. The Jacobites fired at him and hit him on the shoulder and killed the officer beside him. There was about 6 of them there. The news went up, King Billy's dead. The following morning, out he came, arms strapped up, we're ready. That's all the men needed. He was like William Wallace. And they beat the Catholic army that day. James went back to France and stayed in the palace of Saint-Germain for the rest of his life. Now, there was another thing that I haven't mentioned, and I should have mentioned. Enniskillen was a good distraction, because they had to split the Jacobite army between Enniskillen and Londonderry, because the Enniskillens were holding out just as well, and they kept attacking the supplies coming up to Londonderry. But we wonder, the apprentice boys of Derry wonder, what would have happened if James had taken that city? What would have happened if he had gone to Scotland and they'd adopted him? William was very weak on the English throne. He would have had the French, the Irish, and the Scottish to attack England. It would have been very weak. You may have had a Catholic king at the end of the 17th century, and that would have been a whole different world. And the only people who can find for that are the apprentice boys who slammed the gate shut. And then their determination inside that city to make sure it was never going to be taken out of their hands. Today, it's a mixed city. The wall going right around the city for one side of the community was always seen as a hangman's noose, a noose around the neck of the city. And I can tell you today, ladies and gentlemen, I've been up on that wall, I'm on that wall 4 times a day. And I've met people from both sides of the community, and I've been called both sides bad names. I have. But today, that city, from our point of view, is seen as a necklace around the city. It's a virtue to have the city, and we're proud to have it. Every year, coming up, ladies and gentlemen, Halloween, the big festival, it's the biggest in Europe. And they have it on the walls. Put your gate, they put on pyrotechnics. The foil itself, you know this. And we mix Catholic, Protestant, Jew, Gent, we don't care. The other thing on the wall, we have big parades going along here. We have a cycle club, if you know, there's one of those chapters of Hell's Angels. You know what they call themselves? The Knitting Club. The Knitting Club. You couldn't meet a nicer bunch of men. Looking at them, they're scared of the bejesus, are you? But these guys are lovely men. If you ever meet them, they usually hang around the Diamond. I see them nearly every day, and they wear these big jackets, and they look scary, like something like a ZZ Top or something like that. But they're lovely. So the walls today are much more used by the people, and I hope at some stage that I see you guys all coming up, saying hello to me, and we'll have a little bit of a chat and a walk around the walls. Folks, listen, I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you've enjoyed the last hour of me telling you my version. But I can tell you, if you want a good version, I know in about a month's time, I think it's November 6th or something like that, the Apprentice Boys of Derry are doing the very same lecture. I'm not doing it though. I'm going up to listen to it. That book there by Milligan is well worth a look through. Everything you want to know is inside there about the siege and who took part and the names and all the apprentice boys. The apprentice boys' names, by the way, were all on the side of Pillar. But folks, come up and see me sometime. I hope to see you again sometime. Now what I'm going to do is leave you here. This is the last slide, I promise. My friends told me I was going to do 73 slides, and I thought, no, these guys, I'd have enough of that. Now if you want to, there's the guys, that's where I got my reference from. If you want to take any reference, I would really recommend that book there. Your man, I'm a great fan of Brian Lacey. He's now the head of history in Trinity College in Dublin, and they've got these other 2 books. That one's pretty good. George Walker made a book himself. People fought over the Reverend George Walker's book. They said it wasn't true and accurate. They said it didn't do enough for the Presbyterian people. And he said it was all the Church of Ireland people. Anyway, I don't know about that. But those are the 3 that I took my reference from. Folks, listen, I've said enough. I hope you've enjoyed listening to me. I haven't seen anybody sleeping, which is great. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your night. Now there's a little band I'm going to take up here, and I hope you've got your dancing shoes on. Thank you very much for listening to me. Just need 20 more. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. Listening to that, a few memories. I spent a year in the city at college. Stayed in digs on the Northern Road, and there was a group of us young guys from Tyrone decided one evening to take a wander down, and this was in the early 80s. Decided to go for a walk around the walls. Good luck with that. And we were there for about 5 minutes when we were suddenly joined by a few members of the RUC who quickly advised us to get off the walls. But it's great that now you are able to go and visit them. So
thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. Next we have James Monaghan is going to give us a little talk, and Tony mentioned there about the kings of the rivers, or that are on the wall, on the arches.
The arches have the actual keystone in the middle. Each of the arches have a keystone. If you go down to Ferry Quay Gate, you see George Walker on the outside, and you'll see a Presbyterian minister, his name escapes me from on the inside. Down at the magazine gate, you will see Colonel Murray and Colonel Baker on either side of the magazine gate. The other gates don't have heads. Even Shipquay Gate, you see the Cup of Plenty. There's a name for the Cup of Plenty. But that Shipquay Gate, most of the gates have been twerked up over the years from what they were. The two that you see in Bishopgate are actually identical, the same sculptor as in the Custom House down in Dublin. So you go into Dublin, you see a lot of heads. Those same two heads. They don't look too happy, by the way. When you look at the one with 1690 wrote on it, it must have been done on a Friday evening. They called the Ark of the Train, but they never really finished it. Because there's, above his head's a big empty slab. It's pretty right on it. And above it, again, just as you know when you go down the West Link in Belfast, there's a big statue of King Billy. There's supposed to be one of King Billy on the back of a horse on the top of there. There's no mad rush to put it in Derry, by the way. But if you, that's what's there, and have a look at that. But they are deities. Most of the rivers of Ireland would have a deity or a god. And those are the two deities. Foyle on one side and Boyne on the other. Does that help you?
That's fine. Well, leading on from that, what James is going to talk to us about is our own local river, the Fairywater. And I don't think it's the deities, or maybe it is the deities, of the Fairywater. So James has a little talk on the history of the Fairywater.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I'm actually going to read a report. This is a report that was in the Ulster Herald in February 1907. And it's a report by a man, I presume, who went out to what's called a Cayley. He obviously had been invited out to this Cayley, where he was going to hear the story of how the Fairywater got its name. It's a fairly long report. What he does is a fairly good introduction about these Cayleys and what went on at them, and people telling stories. And then he actually has written the story that this old man told at the Cayley. And before I start, I just need to say thanks to Kieran Ferris. Don't think Kieran's not here tonight, is he? It was Kieran who got all this information for us. And maybe just to mention that there's a word in it, you probably know the she as the fairies. You probably all have heard of the banshee, a fairy woman, who reportedly follows certain families and can be heard crying before a member of that family dies. And I think some people here have told me they've actually heard the banshee. So I haven't heard her yet anyway. I might also mention some other information that Kieran got for us. The report mentions the Priest Bridge, which is over the Fairywater down between Carabahullion and Tullymuck. I was reared actually in Carabahullion myself, so I know where it is. The Priest Bridge was built in 1838 by a man called Samuel Gamble, and he was from the Gram outside in Skillen. And just another bit of information that Kieran got. Another man, James Gamble, also from the Gram, He emigrated to America in 1819, and he established with another man who actually came from England, called Proctor, established a company called Procter and Gamble. You probably know about that company. So that Gamble came also from the ground outside in Enniskillen. And one of the products they make, you probably have it in your kitchen, Fairy Liquid. And as far as I know, that name Fairy Liquid has nothing to do with the Fairywater. So there we are. But I read this report. This is the report that the reporter sent to, or was in the paper in 1907. And it's called The Legend of the Fairywater. He starts off with a few lines of a poem, and then he goes on to the report. So here goes. The roof was thatched over with bright yellow straw. The walls were as white as the snowflakes are drawn, and it was like a picture a painter would draw, and the boreen beyond in the corner. In the long winter evenings, when the Storm King reigns supreme without, many a tale is told by the cheerful turf fires of Tyrone, from Knockmoney to the Mourne. Tales as old as the hills themselves, of the Shee and the Chernino, ghosts and hobgoblins. We need not seek the genesis of this strange belief in the power of the supernatural. Suffice to say, it peeps from out the mists of antiquity, and echoes from the sacred grove of the Druids, and enters into the very nomenclature of our Irish place names. When the fierce November blast is howling without, threatening to strip the cabin, and the old skag bushes and the rowan trees behind the house creak and groan, 'tis then the Irish peasant can fully appreciate the modest charms of his own fireside, and it is then the Irish family circle is seen at its best. The turf fire sheds its ruddy glow and casts fantastic shadows about the old-fashioned dresser and humble furnishings of the kitchen, in which the family and the kindly neighbours are assembled. The man of the house, from his place in the chimney corner, then conjures up tales of fairy haunted grass and of homely rushy glens, where the wee folk hold high revel, and where frightful goblins once upon a time made the place a terror to us poor mortals. The moonlight frolics of the wee folk, however, forms the favourite theme of these tales. To the lively imagination of the Celt, the Shee were at once gay and sprightly, music loving and kindly. At times the reverse. Revengeful, covetous and malevolent, industrious but elusive. The old time belief in the mighty powers of the Shee is fast fading away. It formed the creed of a more primitive and less prosaic age than ours. Still, now and again, we come across an abridged and strangely contorted tongue that gives, in homely parlance by the Irish fireside, a tale that may have served to while the tedium of the hours of the campfires of the Fianna long ago, when the pulse of Erin beat strong. But to my story. Some years ago, I formed one of a group of listeners to a fairy tale with a local significance. It was near the Monaghan of the North Tyrone, and and the scene by the homely fireside was much the same as I have attempted to describe. But in these days of crowning quests, the reader will take it come grano sauce, or a pinch of salt. The reader will take it come grano sauce, and bear with me while I endeavour to give my old host's narrative. You crossed the Peace Bridge over the Fairywater, he remarked, in answer to my detailed description of the route I had traversed. But why is it called the Fairywater, seeing it is such a sluggish stream? A natural enough sort of question, he replied. For further down from Omagh, it's known as the Annie. But I can tell you, if you're not in a hurry to make your journey shorter, and from all the appearances, you're as well where you are. There's a broch over Cranagh way. There's a broch over Cranagh way still, and I'm greatly mistaken if we're not in for a bruckle time. The old man reached forward to a hole in the corner of the fireplace and drew forth a well-seasoned clay pipe. And when he seemed to have steam up to his satisfaction, he began, my father's ones was reared across there in Tullymuck, and in his time there was one nearly coiled lived in Carr, full and scanty. He had a good place, and 6 of his good milk cows as you'd see in a day's travelling. Prices for all kinds of farm produce was high, and the weaving was good at the time. There was fill and fetch more, and there was plenty for everyone. Neely's wife, good rest to them, was a well-doing woman too. She was a great spinner, in her time, and the town of Omagh would bait her hanks. Sorry, the town of Omagh wouldn't bait her hanks. At the time I want to tell you of, she was a young woman with 2 children. There was little shop goods bought in them days, and we all wove and wore our own homegrown, homemade stuff, blue frieze, and the woman blue cloaks and rugged gowns. The tailors came to the houses and put up their boards, and right devil me care fellows they were. 'Twas the same with the shoes. Why, man, there was 20 brokers in the country then. Which is right. There was 20 brokers in the country then, but there's not one now. Oh my, but it's a changed world entirely. As for that matter, I hadn't a stitch on my foot till I was close on 16. Well, sir, as I was telling you, Neely Coyle had 2 children, a wee Gersick of 3 and a wean in the cradle, a boy, as promising a youngster as she would wish to see. But what would you have of it but coming on holiday, the wean took bad, and it pined and wasted away until you'd think there was nothing there but skin and bone. They tried all sorts of remedies and done their best for it, but it was all no use. It was no use at all. There was a constant yap and whinge in the house, and the poor woman was at her wit's end what to do. Things was this way when Ned Mullen and Barney Dolan came to work and put up their board, for Neely had clothes to make, and a few of the neighbours round about. Now, it happened Neely himself was away at Omagh. Was away at Omagh with corn. And there was no one behind but the good woman and the 2 tailors. By nightfall she had occasion to go to the well for water, and left the sick Wayne as usual in the cradle. The tailors were working for all they were worth, as they wanted the shoot finished that night for nearly the next day, Sunday. And besides, there was to be a camp and a dance in Gargahullion on Monday night, so they wanted things read up. The house was quit, and the Wayne in the cradle had stopped yapping, for a wonder. Barney Dolan happened to lift his eyes and looked in the direction of the cradle. The Wayne was fumbling with his wee thin fingers under the pillow, and in a while he saw it draw out 2 bits of sticks. Barney signed to Ned Mullen to look round, when, sir, with that, up pops the child in the cradle and says, "Get down out of that, Dolan. Now that thou blades out of that, Dolan. Now thou blades gone. Can't you take a step?" The tailors were too frightened to say anything. But while you coughed the thing in the cradle, made the 2 bits of sticks into the nicest wee pair of bagpipes you ever set eyes on. Jigs, reels and hornpipes it gave them galore. It threw the glamoury so completely over them when it struck up the one that shakes the barley, that the tailors jumped off the board and danced how long they never knew. But when Mrs. Coyle came back with the water, she found the 2 tailors lying out of breath near the sink at the far end of the kitchen, and the child out of which was were crying. They didn't want to say anything as to the causes, but that evening, when she asked them down to the room for their tea, a novelty in them days, Faith Barney Dolan let the cat out of the bag, and says he, my good woman, that's no child you have there, that's a fairy. The poor woman, when she heard this, was ready to go out of her mind. So they up and tells her all. She was ready to be tied. So she says nothing until Neely came home from Omagh, and they all had a confab, and they decided to consult a knowledgeable travelling woman. But Faith, she too put the box on the heckles, and so she, take it easy and get rid of it as soon as you can. Next Tuesday, just say out boldly in the kitchen, that Wayne's not mending a bit, and I must go into Omagh and see Dr. Hamilton. So, to make a long story short, Tuesday came, and the poor woman put on a shawl and tied the child in it on her back. She was tired when she come to the bridge to complain of her back, and let on she had a pain in it. And when she would be resting at the range wall, to slip the tying of the shawl and let the thing into the water, and she'd have no more bother. So when she came to the bridge, she done as she was told. When lo and behold ye, as soon as the thing lit on the water, the devil a sink it did. It laughed till you'd heard it through Rash. The poor woman was thunderstruck when she saw it floating with a wee small pair of pipes in its hands, and it playing Fairywater Killavy. Of course, the thing was kept quit, except among the neighbours, and that's why the river's called the Fairywater on the Omagh side. The old man shook the ashes from his pipe and replaced it in the hole of the hob. There was a shuffle of chairs and stools and a break up in the circle. "Sure, you're not going so soon," he says. "But then I can't ask you to stay late such a night. So, Banachlat." And home the neighbours go by highway and boreen, while the wind moans across the bogland, and the curlew calls to the dream of elf and leprechaun and hidden treasure. Thank you.
Thanks again, James. So coming up, we're going to have shortly have a wee bit of music, but before that, we're going to have some refreshments here. So if you want to make your way across, we get a cup of tea and some refreshments.
Seeking fortune fair, up and down the two coastlines, and traveled everywhere. Portland east to Portland west, and back along the line. I'm going now to the place that's best, that old town of mine. 8 more miles and Louisville will come into my view. 8 more miles of this old road, I'll never more be blue. I knew right then that I'd come back, I knew it from the start. 8 more miles to Louisville, the hometown of my heart. There's bound to be a gal somewhere that you like best of all. Mine lives down in Louisville, she's long and she is tall. She's the kind that you can find traveling across the land. I'm on my way this very day to win her heart and hand. 8 more miles of Louisville will come into my view. 8 more miles of this old road, I'll never more be blue. I knew someday that I'd come back, I knew it from the start. 8 more miles to Louisville, the hometown of my heart. Now I can picture in my mind a place we call our home. A humble little hut for two will never want to roam. A place that's right for that love side is in those bluegrass hills, where gently flows the Ohio by a place called Louisville. 8 more miles of Louisville will come into my view. 8 more miles of this old road, I'll never more be blue. I knew someday that I'd come back, I knew it from the start. It's 8 more miles to Louisville, the hometown of my heart. And we'll all go together to the wide mountain tide, all around the blue and heather. Will you go, lassie, go? The northern lights of old Aberdeen mean home, sweet home to me. The northern lights of Aberdeen are what I long to see. I've been a wanderer all of my life, and many's a sight I've seen. Godspeed the day when I'm on my way to my home in Aberdeen. When I was a lad, a tiny wee lad, my mother she said to me, come see the northern lights, my boy, they're bright as they can be. She called them the heavenly dancers, merry dancers.